Greetings from across the globe.
I'm really looking forward to this unit.
Yeah, it's pretty action-packed with all the wars and invasions and hostility.
Sorry to interrupt, but is your window taking up more space than usual?
Yes, I changed your appeasement settings. Don't worry, it'll stop soon.
I guess that's okay, but hey, it's not stopping!
Appeasement never works. Hi, I'm Kim Lochner, the emperor of this overview video.
Hi, I'm Colby and I know the editor. We're introducing Unit 7, Global Conflict 1914 to 1945.
In May 1914, the transformations of the long 19th century were full of promise. Liberal and democratic revolutions had brought representative government to significant parts of the world for the first time, and the Industrial Revolution promised efficient production, cheaper goods, and faster communication and travel.
Yet the effects of these revolutions were unequal for different people in different places. Industrialization allowed some countries to control many others through vast overseas empires. Militant nationalism helped inspire competition among those empires.
But the long 19th century was about to end in a way that would bring all its progress into question. On June 28, 1914, Gavrilo Princip would assassinate the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Less than 2 months later, the First World War would erupt. The most powerful countries in the world would turn all of their nationalist passions, money, factories, railroads and steamships to the task of killing each other. From 1914 to 1918, many suffered through the First World War. The terrible trench warfare, gas weapons, artillery and grinding conflict left a generation of men dead. The economies of major world powers and their colonies were destroyed. It seemed impossible that a war of that magnitude could ever happen again, so it was often referred to as the war to end all wars.
Only a few decades later, however, the world would start back down the road to conflict. The children and grandchildren of those who had fought in the First World War would become the soldiers, sailors, doctors, and nurses on the front lines of the Second World War. And this Second War would cause even more death and destruction than its predecessor. Most history textbooks divide the First and Second World Wars into 2 units. But what if we look at the whole period between 1914 and 1945 as a single 30-year period of conflict? Viewed in this way, the years between the 2 wars look more like a brief interlude than a period of actual peace. It's as if the combatants were just taking a moment to catch their breath.
The problems left by the First War revealed a broken global system. They included resentful defeated powers, victorious states squabbling over the spoils, a global economic system hobbled by war reparations, and widespread trauma. From this perspective, the Second World War looks inevitable. It seems like a logical result of the world's failure to solve these problems in the 1920s and 1930s.
Viewed through the community's frame, this period looks like a struggle between different views of how we govern ourselves. After World War I, ideas about democracy and international cooperation clashed with new, radical ideas about nationalism. The peace process did not discredit militant nationalism as a warmongering ideology. Ultimately, it strengthened it. A new way of thinking of the state as community emerged. It was very nationalist and authoritarian, meaning it required strict obedience. These new forms of nationalism depended on oppressive and discriminatory ideas about race.
Another way to understand the causes of conflict is to look through the production and distribution frame. Economic troubles, like the Great Depression beginning in 1929, drove people to look for someone to blame. Authoritarian political parties promised economic growth at the price of individual freedoms, often making alliances with wealthy business leaders and corporations. This was particularly true of fascist parties in Germany and Italy. Once these parties gained power, they kept it by instituting popular policies of hypernationalism and discrimination against minorities. Organisations for global cooperation tried to hold back these movements, The most extensive of these was the League of Nations, the world's first international political forum. But they failed, and their failure set the scene for the horrors of the Second World War. These horrors included the wholesale slaughter of Chinese civilians by the Japanese army, the deliberate starvation and oppression of populations in the Ukraine and Belarus by the Soviet Union, the Italian use of gas on Ethiopian civilians, the concentrated bombing of Spanish cities by Italian and German fascists during the Spanish Civil War, and the Allied firebombing of German and Japanese cities. And finally, the Nazi extermination camps in Germany and German-occupied Europe. In this unit, we asked the key question: what caused the global conflicts and atrocities from 1914 to 1945? And how did people experience this period of global war?
One method we can use to identify the causes of conflict is by looking at data. We can revisit this chart showing the number of democracies across the world over time. You may remember that we looked at this data in Unit 4, when we saw the number of democracies rising across the 19th century. But then the number levels off, before suddenly dropping dramatically in the 1930s. This chart defines democracy as a system that has institutions in which individuals can play a political role, voting and expressing their preferences. This definition requires that the people in charge are kept under some control by courts, journalists, and other institutions. Clearly, the number of countries that were democracies by this measure were decreasing in the 1930s as authoritarianism rose. We can also explore the causes and experiences of this 30-year conflict by scale switching. We can zoom in to explore smaller stories. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended the First World War, also created the League of Nations. The League established its headquarters in the neutral country of Switzerland. Here, on the shores of Lake Geneva, delegates from many of the world's nations met in the hope of creating a better future. During the 1920s, the League passed treaties that sought to dictate the rules of war and protect civilians as well as wounded and captured prisoners. These would be the Geneva Conventions. But soon, authoritarian leaders would begin to test the League, challenging its authority. In June 1936, the ruler of Ethiopia, Emperor Haile Selassie, arrived in the newly constructed Palace of Nations in Geneva. He was there to appeal to the League for protection against one of those challenges. Kim, help me out here.
Yeah, this part's tricky, so let's team up. Right. Selassie's nation was under siege. In the 1930s, Ethiopia was one of the few remaining independent African nations.
Benito Mussolini, the fascist leader of Italy, wanted to expand his empire, and in 1935, he had invaded Ethiopia. Italy's industrial military gave it a distinct advantage in the conflict.
So, Selassie fled to Geneva to seek the League's intervention.
He asserted that the invasion was a violation of international law and accused the Italians of using mustard gas, which was banned under the Geneva Conventions.
In his speech to the delegates in the Palace of Nations, Selassie warned that the stakes of this conflict reached beyond Ethiopia's borders. Colby, can you read what he said?
Here it is. It is international morality that is at stake. Having the signatures appended to a treaty value only insofar the signatory powers have a personal, direct, and immediate interest involved, at a time when my people are threatened with extermination, when the support of the League may ward off the final blow, may I be allowed to speak with complete frankness. Should it happen that a strong government finds it may, with impunity, destroy a weak people, then the hour strikes for that weak people to appeal to the League of Nations to give its judgment in all freedom. God and history will remember your judgment.
After his speech, Selassie warned the world, "It is us today, it will be you tomorrow." His warning was ignored. The League failed to take action because its delegates feared that angering Mussolini would drive him to ally with Hitler's Germany. Meanwhile, Mussolini declared himself Emperor of Ethiopia and withdrew Italy from the League of Nations.
The League's failure to act exposed its weakness. Authoritarians in Germany and Japan were now emboldened to continue their own aggressive expansion, confident they would not be challenged. This impunity helped produce the horrors surrounding the Second World War, in which over 70 million died. Of these, 12 million were murdered by Germany's Nazi state in the Holocaust. The dead included not only Jews, but also Roma, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, political prisoners, disabled people, and citizens of Eastern European states.
Genocide, the attempt to extinguish entire peoples, was one of the principal horrors of the Second World War. The war and its horrors were arguably a result of the unresolved conflicts of the 3 decades that preceded it. How would it influence the decades to come?
Okay, I finally get what you were doing with that appeasement settings thing earlier.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I mean, sure, at first it just looked like you were hogging all the screen time, but now I see you were illustrating how the Allied strategy of appeasing fascists in the 1930s was doomed to fail.
Yeah, that's totally what I was doing. I am such a clever teacher.